Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I am your host, Graham Hall, joined for this bye-week edition of the Swamp247 Podcast by my co-host, Jacob Rudner, and we're going to get right into it. We're going to recap what I think is Florida's most complete performance of the 2024 season thus far. Saturday's 48-20 win over Kentucky. It marked DJ Lagway's highly, anticipated first SEC start, and I had said that I thought that there would be some growing pains from this former five-star prospect as defenses had a chance to prepare for just him. And that really, while there were some mistakes, absolutely, this was an extremely effective performance from him, especially on throws over 20 yards. And Florida's defense continues to make strides since the first bye week of the season here. 3-1 since Florida had their first bye week, with that loss at Tennessee being really the only downside in that stretch here. And Jacob, we're going to just jump right into it. What did you think of Florida's offensive performance against the Wildcats? What stood out to you as areas that they did well, and maybe some areas that you still would like to see cleaned up moving forward here for the final month of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I would go as far as to say that was Florida's best performance in any single game under Billy Napier to this point. They kind of had everything firing on all cylinders. Jaden Baugh, who you mentioned, was fantastic in the ground game with 5 touchdowns. So was Florida's offensive line in the run game. That was an issue that you and I had discussed on the podcast as being really restrictive, and an issue that Billy Napier said kind of kept him up at night, that Florida couldn't run the football consistently and effectively. They did that against Kentucky. Florida, throughout its entire time under Billy Napier, has had a lot of struggles throwing the ball deep. DJ Lagway now, through that contest, is the single highest completion percentage thrower on passes over 20 yards. This entire game basically revolved around his ability to connect on the deep ball. So that was very encouraging. Florida did a good job, protecting the passer as well. Defensively, I thought the Gators did a really good job eliminating Kentucky's run game. Their quarterback was pretty much unable to get anything going. Florida's pass rush didn't necessarily have a whole bunch of sack production, but was effective in disturbing him. And then the secondary play was quite good, with some turnovers and just, all around solid coverage. This was a complete game. The only blunder really in my mind was, a kick return touchdown that Florida allowed 99 yards, Berrien Brown. But even that, to me, is not such a big deal, especially when you consider that Berrien Brown is now the all-time leader in SEC kick return touchdown. So, one of the best to ever beat Florida. He's beat a lot of other teams too. Not the biggest deal to me. I didn't love Billy Napier's clock management. In the time before halftime, I think Florida really did have an opportunity to stay aggressive and to start to pull away even more than it did. But at the end of the day, Graham, this was a complete performance. Florida got done the job that it needed to get done. You and I had been talking about on the Swamp247 message boards and in your content that a loss in this game was probably going to be pretty damaging, if not the end of the Billy Napier tenure. And not only did Florida avoid that reality, but it did so pretty emphatically. So all around, great performance. Not much to gripe with from this one. And I think it really could be a launching point for this team.
Yeah, Florida's offensive line looks like that they have made strides over the past month. And I think it's worth noting that the competition has dropped off. No offense to Mississippi State and UCF and now Kentucky. I think Kentucky has a very talented front seven. Tennessee as well has a really good defensive front, but it does look like Florida, especially at the tackle position and at center with Jake Slaughter, that they have protected at a much higher rate. They're ranked 4th in the SEC in fewest sacks allowed through the start of the season here. They had allowed just 10 sacks. And this is a team that is ranked much higher when it comes to pass protection grading by Pro Football Focus. They entered that Kentucky team ranked 7th in the country in pass protection. And this is a team that a year ago finished the year ranked 62nd overall in pass protection grading. So it does look like there's some tangible progress. But as I just noted, the caveat here is that they're going to face a lot more daunting opponents the rest of the way. And you could even easily see, going back to the struggles that they had against Miami and Texas A&M, they're going to have to continue to prove that their recent performances aren't flukes necessarily. I think the other encouraging sign is Florida's defense here. You mentioned their ability to affect the quarterback, even if it didn't result in a number of sacks that they would like. They've been able to win their matchups in pass rush. The secondary hasn't had nearly as many coverage lapses, and this is a secondary that lost Jason Marshall midway through the game. Devin Moore had to exit for an injury at the end of the game there. They were playing a preferred walk-on and Cormani McLean, and he had a really impactful performance here, and a lot of young guys around him too, from Dijon Johnson to Jordan Castell. Obviously, it looks like the defense has made some strides. I think, again, the caveat is that they're going to play a lot of high-powered offenses. This Kentucky offense was not one that really, I think, challenged a lot of people. Yeah, they had some success this season. They upset Ole Miss earlier in the year. They lost by just 1 to Georgia. So this is not a horrible Kentucky team by any means. But do you get the sense that Florida's defense really has made tangible improvements, or are you still kind of looking forward to seeing if that remains to be seen here, and whether we'll really find out when November arrives and Florida has to play the likes of Georgia, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and then Florida State? Do you really think that you've seen improvement from this Florida defense over the last month?
I do. I think it wouldn't be fair to say that we hadn't seen improvement. I think that Florida's pass rush has been a lot more effective. Guys like Jack Pyburn have been standouts recently. I thought, Desmond Watson had a pretty solid game against Kentucky. I think Cam Jackson is a guy who stepped up in a pretty big way. Florida's secondary certainly had a very good game against Kentucky, including guys like Triquez Bridges, who weren't really relied upon in the early goings of the season for whatever reason, and have really turned it on. And so, I do think that Florida has found something on that side of the ball. I would add also that I think that there may have been some changes on that side of the football that have benefited this unit. More specifically, I think that they've simplified things to some degree. We had been hearing from players that Florida was having a hard time getting into alignments. Guys weren't seeing signals on time. They weren't understanding what they needed to do in a defense that relies upon, guys playing with their head. You have to be able to get into the right alignment in this defense, because they bring pressure from all over the field in this simulated pressure, defense, where you have linebackers and defensive backs blitzing. And if you're not aligned, you're in trouble. And so it seems to have been cleaned up. I think Florida's guys have a better understanding of the scheme, and I think that they're playing harder within the scheme, and those two things have led to improvements. I will caveat this by saying that I agree with something you said, which is that Florida has not really played the highest of caliber opponents in recent weeks, and I would even go as far as to say that includes a Tennessee offense that clearly had its own issues and things to figure out. So I'm curious to see what this unit is able to do against a Georgia in Jacksonville, against a Texas in Austin, and even a team like LSU that's completing a high percentage of its passes and has looked pretty good through the air. So yes, I think it's improved based on what we've seen. No, I'm not ready to say that this unit has really turned the page and reinvented itself at this point in the season. I think it has a lot to prove, over the course of these next 5 games where the going will get tough.
Yeah, that first stretch of the season was supposed to be the one where Florida kind of padded the win column in a sense here, because you look at the final month of the season, I don't think there's a team out there that would want to trade places with Florida and play the number of opponents. 4 opponents ranked in the top, 18 right now in the AP top 25 poll as we sit here and record this on Thursday, October 24th. You have Texas and Georgia that easily look like 2 top 5 teams, even though Georgia, went in there and came away with a 30-15 victory recently. This is a Georgia offense that has a very capable quarterback in Carson Beck. He led the SEC last year in passing yards. His offensive line has been a little bit banged up, but when they're running the ball effectively and he's allowed to throw downfield and take advantage of the talent that they have at wideout, that is a very, very tough Georgia team to match up with on a weekly basis. And it's really going to test Florida defensively. And, even for Texas, I know there was a little bit of a QB controversy against the Bulldogs here where they benched Quinn Ewers in the first half of that game and then turned back to him in the second half. And he was much more effective in the second half and trying to rally that team to a comeback. Wasn't able to do it, but I think he had nearly 200 passing yards there in the second half. Whether, it's him or Arch Manning out there, I think they feel really confident in what they have offensively in Austin. And then LSU, I think Garrett Nussmeier, maybe he's flown under the radar a little bit for Florida fans who haven't really followed that team in Baton Rouge, but I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC right now. Maybe some questions about how, balanced their offensive attack is. I think that they would like to see more improvement on the ground as well. But their passing attack is, I think, one of the best in the conference, and that's going to really challenge Florida's secondary, especially if they're going to be dealing with some injuries, which was the case here this past weekend. This is a bye week, though, and Florida has pointed to, really has kind of not discussed too much what you said, the simplifying of things and cleaning some things up. They've used the line, and you can believe it or not, that the competition of those 3 practices and really just competing and run and call it and just attacking practice for those 3 days has led to this improvement. It is obviously more than that. And getting healthy is certainly something that has helped Florida. You mentioned Jack Pyburn. I think he's been one of the standouts for the past month, who has really improved that Florida defensive front and their pass rush. But when it comes to, I think, cleaning some stuff up and simplifying, that really is the big takeaway for me. This is a defense that maybe they were being asked to do too much, that the scheme was not something that they were able to do effectively, and then it led to more mistakes than they would like. Alignment issues have continued to be an issue on both sides of the ball for Florida here. Obviously, this bye week is going to be critical to getting healthier, from the offensive line to the pieces we just mentioned in the secondary, but they're going to have a chance to make some further improvements before this daunting final 5-game stretch of the season. What areas are you looking for Florida to come out of the bye week and improve upon as they prepare to face 2 back-to-back top 5 ranked teams in Georgia and Texas?
I think it all goes back to consistency. This is a Florida team under Billy Napier that has struggled to sustain momentum. I think it's a team that has shown flashes, but then becomes very inconsistent and reverts back to a lot of its bad habits. And so this is a stretch of season here coming up that is going to test whether or not Florida has really made strides in that regard. They are 4-3 now. I think that it's fair to say that they have generated a little bit of positive momentum. That Tennessee loss certainly stung. But at the end of the day, there's 2 ways to look at the Tennessee game. Do Florida fans want to lose it? Is that acceptable to them? Absolutely not, and it shouldn't be. But Florida was, reasonably sizable underdog on paper in that game, and it held tough and forced the game to overtime, even with Graham Mertz getting hurt and suffering an emotional season-ending injury. So this team does have some, gusto as it moves into this difficult final 5-game portion of its schedule. But in years past, we've seen Florida teams generate a little bit of momentum and then, evaporate when it comes time to actually put it to the test against a good team. And so, I think a lot of fans look at Georgia and they see a team that is vulnerable potentially to some sort of an upset. And I think that could be true, but it's also dangerous thinking, because this Florida team is just as easily, I think, shaken from the track that it's starting to maybe go down. And 4-3 to me is a fine record through 7 games, but it could look a lot worse, if they allow the momentum to slip and they don't really establish the consistency that I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think Florida fans would obviously argue that they would love to be 5-2 right now heading into that slate, have a chance to win 1 game, especially facing Florida State at the end of the season there. You have a chance to get to bowl eligibility. You win a bowl game at 6-6. You finish with a winning record. I think a lot of people would take that given Florida's schedule. I don't know if it's going to appease the masses of Florida fans who maybe already feel as if it's too little too late. I think that is a key thing to remember. And we wrote about this at Swamp247 last week, that barring a winning record over the final 5 games with an upset victory somewhere in there, whether it's Georgia at Texas, beating Ole Miss on senior day, winning against LSU in what hopefully will be a night game in the Swamp, unless they can go 3-2 down that stretch, I think most people are of the opinion that you're kind of just delaying the inevitable. So this is certainly a decisive final month of the season for the Florida football program. If they continue to make, as you mentioned, coaching mistakes, clock mismanagement, still have to burn timeouts due to alignment issues, don't capitalize in the red zone, which was an issue against Tennessee. If they continue making the same mistakes and don't make these improvements coming out of the bye week, it's only going to further the notion in a lot of people's eyes that a coaching change is inevitable in this point. And while I kind of hate to talk about that midway through the season, it kind of is one of the reality aspects of this current UF team here. And they're going to need to continue improving defensively and offensively, have balanced rushing attack with having Montrell Johnson. You assume that he's going to be back in the near future by everything that Billy Napier has said. Trayon Webb as well. KD Daniels is trending in the right direction. They're going to look to get a little bit healthier at some other positions here. They're going to have to make sure that they take advantage of each possession here against each one of these opponents, or else you're going to only see those calls louder. And a lot of people are already apathetic when they look at the schedule about what Florida's chances are and getting emotionally invested in what this program is looking to do right now. So it is absolutely going to be, I think, a very, very intriguing final month of the season. If Florida can pull off one of those upsets here, it really is going to, I think, go a long way to the possibility of a fourth year for Billy Napier in Gainesville. We have said time and time again, it's not out of the question, even if it seems unlikely, even if it seemed that the end was nigh at multiple points. They still have a chance here if they can get some upsets and go down the stretch and finish with a winning record in November to potentially enter 2025 with Billy Napier as head coach. I think that is certainly something that is a possibility, but it's going to take a near miraculous run in a sense here, the final month of the season. And we're going to have to see how it all shakes out. We'll obviously be coming back with more episodes here of the Swamp247 podcast. I will note before we hop out of here that this is a locker room that still feels as if they have a chance to subvert expectations and pull off some upsets that many people are not expecting them to pull off. You know, as college football deals with opt-outs and speculation about a head coach's job. Remember, Billy Napier was projected to be the first head coach fired by Vegas a couple of months ago. Well, that didn't come to fruition as we saw a couple head coaching changes here and some coordinator changes even in the SEC, with Oklahoma parting ways with Seth Littrell, a guy who they had only hired as their offensive coordinator about a year ago. So this certainly is the time where you're going to see some shakeup when it comes to coaching decisions here. And for Florida, it may happen sooner than later, or it may not happen at all in 2024. I think the final month of the season is really going to go a long way to determining that. But like I was saying, this is a locker room that still feels as if they are going to surprise a lot of people the rest of the way. They haven't dealt with opt-outs, at least to our knowledge here. And that is, I think, a very critical aspect of this. If you're Billy Napier and you haven't lost the locker room, you still have a chance at surprising some people here and pulling off those upset victories that you feel like you can pull out. So we are really looking forward to the final month of the season. It's going to be an exciting time in Gainesville. Looking forward to getting to Jacksonville next Saturday. That's going to be in 9 days here. It's coming up pretty quickly here as Florida looks to complete their bye week to see the Gators take on the Georgia Bulldogs, a game that they have yet to get a victory in the series under Billy Napier. Could it be the first time? We'll have to see on Saturday at 3:30 p.m. But for now, that's going to do it for us for the Swamp247 podcast. For Graham Hall and Jacob Rudner, we'll see you next time.